The keto diet has gained great popularity over the last 10 to 20 years, but it's often poorly understood what ketones are and why they're good for us. So in this video, I'm going to take a deep dive into what's happening in our body when we go into ketosis and the benefits of ketone bodies. So if you're interested in that, watch on. Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Pronk. I studied medicine on an Army scholarship, and then after successful completion of the Australian SAS selection course, I served for 5 years with special operations, including 4 tours of Afghanistan. On discharge from the Army, I completed a Master of Business Administration, sparking a keen interest in entrepreneurship and leading me to co-own multiple small businesses. I'm passionate about resilience and well-being, especially in the military, veteran and first responders community. I've authored multiple best-selling books, and I'm also a proud father and car lover. So welcome to my show, where I'll be discussing all of these things and more. Right, if you've tuned into this video, you've heard about the keto diet. Maybe you've given it a crack, or you want to, but you're not quite sure what it's all about or how to get started. Well, that's what I want to talk to here. So basically, when we're talking about keto, what we're talking about is increasing levels of a thing called ketone bodies in our systems. Now, there are a variety of ways we can get ketones into our system. So you can actually get what's called exogenous ketones. So these are ketone supplements. You can drink these or eat these to build up levels of ketones in your system. But when we look at the ketone diet, we're trying to generate what's called endogenous ketones. So these are ketones that your body creates by itself through the process of breaking down our stored fats. Now, what we want to do here is run our body low and deplete it of carbohydrate. So when we look at our body's normal fuel sources, our body loves carbohydrate. Our body loves running on sugar. All the cells in the body, particularly the brain is the major consumer of our blood sugar. It needs blood sugar, glucose to thrive, but all of our cells have been built in with this redundancy, this ability to have other fuel sources when we don't have enough carbohydrate in our system. And when our blood sugar levels start to dip down, there needs to be a way that our cells can continue to function and thrive, and that is by using ketone bodies. And so when we look at the normal state of people that eat a balanced diet, and thinking of the food pyramid that we all know and love and that most government recommendations are based around, it tells us to eat foods from different groups in different quantities. So we've got things like our breads and cereals, which are all carbohydrate heavy foods at the base of that pyramid, and then we've got other things like our fruits and vegetables. We've got things like our dairy products. We've got our meats, and then at the very top we've got our things like our high fat foods and our high sugar foods, the sweets, the sometimes foods, if you like, as the smallest contributor to that healthy food pyramid. And so what this does is it provides a steady source of carbohydrate to our system that our body digests, takes into the bloodstream as blood sugar. If there's excessive amounts of that in a healthy person, then your body will pull that blood sugar out of the blood and store it in the system through the use of insulin. So people will have heard of insulin. It's got a role in pulling blood sugar out of the blood. We don't want super high blood sugar levels. That's the condition that we end up in diabetes, and that can cause problems in itself. So your body, when you eat food that's got a bunch of carbohydrate, breaks that down, puts sugar into the bloodstream, increasing your blood sugar level. That spikes an insulin release that then takes that sugar and pulls it into the cells. Some of that will get used, but if there's more than your body needs to use it as fuel at that point, some of it gets stored as well. So we've got these mechanisms in our system to be able to use the sugar we need at the time to meet our energy demands of the cells around our body. And then if we've had carbohydrate in excess of what we need, we store it away. And most of this storage of carbohydrate is done in the liver and also our skeletal muscle. So the muscles that move our skeleton and bones, your biceps, your quads, these big muscle groups around the body, have got a good capacity to store carbohydrate. And so it'll get stored in a form called glycogen. So your body stashes some of this stuff away. Then if you exceed that ability to store your sugars, your carbohydrates in glycogen, your body has a fancy process of converting it across to fat and packing it away into fat cells. And this is why if you do eat calories in excess of what you need, that you'll start to gain weight in the form of fat. So even if you're putting sugars into your system, your body will store sugars until it's maxed out its carbohydrate storage capacity, and then it'll start to convert it to fat and pack that away for use later. And this is an evolutionary adaptation. We've evolved to have this ability to store a huge amount of energy in our system in the form of carbohydrate, glycogen, and then in fat for the times where we might not be able to have ready access to food. Served us well in the caveman days when there might have been periods of time where we didn't have ready access to food, maybe over the winter months. And if you haven't checked it out already, check out my video on intermittent fasting where I talk more about being in that fasted state. But our bodies can store all this fuel in the forms of stored carbohydrate and fats. And so if you have a normal diet based on the food pyramid where you're regularly taking in carbohydrate and sugars and glucose and these sort of things, then your body tends to run on that preferentially. So you'll burn that, keep your blood sugar up with those carbohydrates as it comes in. Your cells use it. If there's a bit of excess, then you store that away. So that's the normal state that most of us that eat a balanced diet in accordance with the food pyramid are in. Now, when we look at this keto diet, so driving this process of ketosis and generating these ketone bodies, what we want to do there is deplete our body of its stored carbohydrate. And so what this forces our body to do is to tap into our fat stores, break down the fats, and release this alternate fuel source, which is the ketone bodies. So while most of the cells in our body, particularly our brain, love to run on glucose, they can all run alternatively on these ketone bodies as well. It's an alternate fuel source for periods of time when we're not getting carbohydrate into the system. So to kick off keto, what we want to do is deplete our body of carbohydrate. So the first thing we want to be doing there is not putting a lot of carbohydrate into our system. So a strict ketogenic diet to go into keto is usually less than 50 grams of carbohydrate a day, which once you start tuning into the carb content of the foods you're eating, so any packaged food, you'll be able to look at the label and have a look at the carbohydrate content, work out how much of it roughly you're eating in terms of grams, what percentage of that is carbohydrates, and if you do a bit of research around this, you can look at how the level of fiber affects your carbohydrate absorption, these sort of things, but without getting bogged down into the fine print. Have a look at the labels, work out what's high carb. It's normally the stuff from that cereals part of the food pyramid. If there's other food sources, maybe your fruits and vegetables that don't come with labels, other things like that, hop on Google, check it out, just put in carbohydrate content of whatever, carrots, avocados, eggs, whatever you might be eating, and that'll tell you, and you can start to build this impression of the carbohydrate content. So if you want to get yourself into the keto state, you need to have a good look at the carbohydrate content of what you're eating and start to trim it down. You want to minimize it. So what happens there is your body will recognize that you're not getting as much carbohydrate in through the diet as you normally would, and to maintain your regular blood sugar levels, which is critically important for your body to maintain blood sugar. So if you're not taking carbohydrate in regularly to maintain your blood sugar levels, then your body starts to tap into its stored carbohydrate and break that down and liberate some of that into the bloodstream to top up your blood sugar levels. So that's the initial process that happens when we head towards a keto diet, when we have a low carbohydrate food intake. Your body will initially start to break down stored carbohydrate in the form of glycogen, which is predominantly in our liver and our skeletal muscle. So that's step one. Now, most of us, a healthy person who's been on a normal diet based on the food pyramid, eating carbohydrate, will have about 2 to 3 days worth of stored carbohydrate in their system, which is enough to maintain our blood sugar levels at a normal, healthy level. You can speed that process up if you exercise on a low carbohydrate diet, so your body will tap into that stored glycogen quicker and release it more. And if you look at how long you can last in terms of intensive exercise in the fasted state, studies suggest that's about 2 to 3 hours. So most of us could get out and run, a half marathon maybe, or for the faster ones amongst us, maybe run a whole marathon based purely on our stored glucose and maintain a normal blood sugar level. So somewhere between 2 to 3 hours of intensive exercise and 2 to 3 days of just normal day-to-day function will deplete our bodies of our stored carbohydrate. Now, once that happens, our body recognizes that it's not getting the carbohydrate in, it's burnt through its stores of carbohydrate, and it starts to switch to this alternate fuel supply, and that's when you start to generate these ketones. That's what the keto diet is all about. So once you've burnt through all your stored carbohydrate, your body recognizes it needs more energy and starts to switch on this process of breaking down your stored fats to release these ketones into our bloodstream, and our cells can start using them to top up the fuel requirements that they need because you're not getting the carbohydrates in through the system. Now, we do need to maintain our blood sugar. That's essential, particularly for our brains. Our brain loves glucose, needs a steady level of sugars. And we've evolved to have another amazing process called gluconeogenesis, which is basically your body's tricky way of making sugar, glucose, out of proteins. So your body can tap into stored protein sources and use that as building blocks to put through gluconeogenesis to maintain a normal blood sugar level. So even if we're having no carbohydrate at all, we've depleted all our body's stored carbohydrate over a period of time, our body will continue to make a steady state of blood sugar based on this gluconeogenesis. So you end up with this low, in the keto state, you end up with this low normal blood sugar level that goes along, and then the rest of the cells, including the brain, start to top up their energy requirements using ketone bodies. So that's the process of ketosis. That's how we tap into that stored fat to break down, and that's how we maintain our low normal blood sugar levels. In a healthy person, they're never going to tank out to a dangerously low level because our body has evolved to adapt to this and maintain low normal levels of blood sugar even when we're putting absolutely no carbohydrate into our system for long periods of time. When we look at the benefits of tapping into this ketosis and this keto diet, liberating these ketone bodies, of which there's several that the body can use as a fuel source. People might have heard of a thing called BHB, beta-hydroxybutyrate. That's one of the more known about ketone bodies, but there are several. And there's some significant benefits of having these circulating in our system. Now, one of the main ones that a lot of people find is that ketones act as an appetite suppressant. So once you go through that process of depleting your body's carbohydrate stores, you can feel quite hungry during that. But what people often notice is that once they go into ketosis, their appetite is actually suppressed. And it's believed that ketone bodies have an appetite suppressing effect. And certainly I experience that when I'm in ketosis. It sounds odd, but when you're not eating that carbohydrate, you get over that initial hurdle of depleting your body and your body gets used to running on ketones. You're actually not as hungry. You're not craving the same amount of carbohydrates as you do when you're regularly putting them into your system, and then you might go for a period of fasting, your body's screaming at you to eat carbs. But that generally drops right off, and they think that the ketone bodies have a function as an appetite suppressant. The main interest in ketones, and it's been known for thousands of years, it was identified by the ancient Egyptians that people that they starved had lower seizures. So they would often use starvation as a means of treating seizures, and they suspect that back in the day there was, they weren't thinking about the science behind it. They were probably thinking there was some demon causing these seizures, and maybe they could starve the demon out of the person. But there's evidence to suggest that as far back as the ancient Egyptian cultures had recognized this link between the starvation state, which would have kicked off the ketosis, and reduction in seizure activity. And what modern science has now shown us is that ketone bodies are hugely beneficial to our brains and the health of our brains. And indeed, there's a role for the keto diet in people with severe epilepsy, particularly kids, where they can't control the seizure activity with medications alone. They'll often use a keto diet as an adjunct to minimize the amount of seizures that these kids are having. And that research into the what's called neuroprotective, so protective to the brain function of ketones, has extended into looking at neurodegenerative disorders, specifically Alzheimer's disease, and the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet and particularly periods of intermittent fasting, so this low calorie intake overall, on reducing and removing these dangerous cells that can accumulate in the brain and cause Alzheimer's. There's some research into other neurodegenerative diseases, things like Parkinson's, ALS, these terrible effects on our brain, and showing that the ketone bodies and ketosis can really be protective in these settings. So we've known about the neuro benefits of ketones for quite some time, and that's an ongoing field of research. We've known about this appetite suppressant effect on them. There's some emerging research that's not yet really definitive, but around the benefits of ketones in other mental health conditions, things like depression, anxiety, and even moving into things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. There's some suggestion that ketone bodies are adaptive in these areas, can improve your mood and can reduce some of the effects of the diagnosed mental health disorders. So that there's this great interest in ketones from a human performance perspective. Military special operations have had a look at keto for a couple of things. The Navy SEALs have led the charge in the US on using keto, particularly in deep diving, that there's certain conditions when you're diving in deep water that might increase your chance of having a seizure or problems with your brain there. And also in the forward environment, places like Afghanistan, Iraq, where soldiers were being exposed to regular low-level blast injuries from things like use of plastic explosives to blast into compounds when they're out targeting, things like using heavy weapons right next to your brain that put this concussion through your brain. And so this emerging body of research is looking at using ketosis and ketones as a protective mechanism for brains in that environment as well. So there's a huge range of benefits around certainly that neuroprotective function. There's an element of emerging interest in mood regulation and mood optimization, inflammation, and then protection against the damage from these low-level traumatic brain injuries. There's these niche areas looking at ketosis as beneficial there. But what most people want to use it for is to either lose or regulate their weight and optimize their energy levels to avoid that typical slump that you might get on a normal diet, particularly after lunch when you've had a big meal, you've had a high carbohydrate intake, you've dumped a bunch of insulin into your system, and then as that blood sugar comes back down under the effect of the insulin, you can often get that sort of lull in the early afternoon. And so when you're on a keto diet, you don't get that. You stay energized throughout the day because you're not having those same spikes and troughs in your body's blood sugar levels and your insulin levels. For people who are pre-diabetic or are type 2 diabetics, so non-insulin dependent diabetics, then the keto diet has got great evidence to support benefits in that area. So reversing the effects of pre-diabetes and potentially even reversing early onset type 2 diabetes, bringing that back down to normal by giving that insulin system a rest and regulating those blood sugar levels. So huge amounts of benefits across the board on the keto diet. So how do you kick it off? Well, there's a number of different ways to kick off keto. So one of them can be using fasting. You can dramatically just drop your carbohydrate intake or your calorie intake across the board. And once again, if you haven't checked out my previous video on intermittent fasting, get across and have a look at that and the other benefits of intermittent fasting, of which there's several. So you can fast yourself into this keto state. You can use a bit of exercise in among there to help deplete your carbohydrate stores. That can be a bit dramatic, and that's not for everyone. The more common way to get yourself into keto is a slower progression where you gradually reduce your carbohydrate intake over a period of days or maybe even weeks, and yet you aim to just slowly wind it down to around that 50 grams a day maximum carbohydrate intake and force your body to start to tap into those stored carbohydrates. So that's probably the best way if you are looking at getting into keto to do it. It's a more gradual approach. Just start becoming aware of the carbohydrate content in your diet. Start to cut out certain foods that are high carbohydrate. Start to do a bit of gradual exercise to help burn off some of that stored glycogen, that stored carbohydrate, and gradually ease into keto over a period of days to maybe weeks if you're doing it for the first time is probably good advice. Now, when it comes to knowing when you're in ketosis, you will feel some changes yourself, but you can measure your ketones in your body. A couple of ways of doing that. One is you can go to the chemist and get some urine ketone strips. And so they're little dipstick strips that you dip in your urine, and they've got a little colour band that will change colour when urine's got ketones in it. So when you get ketones build up in your blood, some of that gets filtered through your kidneys, passed out through your urine, and you can detect it on these urine ketone strips. So that's a pretty cheap and easy way to monitor when you're going into ketosis and what your ketone levels are. If you want to be a bit more precise, you can get a blood ketone monitor. So the same little finger prick device that diabetics might use to measure their blood sugar, a lot of those have another strip that you can put into them that will measure ketones. Once again, available at the chemist. A bit more expensive than the urine strips, but gives you a far more precise level of your blood ketones. So that's not a bad tool, and they also have the added benefit if you want to track your blood sugar as you're going along. You can monitor your sugar and your ketones and see what's going on that cellular level in the blood in the body as you go into ketosis. So they're ways of monitoring your ketones and seeing if you're achieving what you want to do. Most people, when they go into ketosis for the first time, will experience what they call the keto flu. And now this can, as the name suggests, leave you feeling a bit flu-like, a bit headachy, a little bit irritable, maybe some body aches and pains. Some people find that when they go into keto, they can have some gastrointestinal side effects. Often you can get a little bit of diarrhea, so your bowels can go a bit loose when you go into ketosis. Another effect can be a thing called diuresis. So ketones are a bit of a diuretic metabolic, and what that means is they increase the amount of fluid getting passed out in your urine. So you might notice some of these side effects, and often they can last for a couple of days, maybe up to a week if you're kicking into keto for the first time. Understand that this is normal, and if you think about periods of time where you might have gone without food for a period of time for whatever reason, you've had a fast, you've missed some meals, and you might have gone into that what's often called a hangry state, that combination of hungry and angry. That's probably an early indicator that your body is starting to get a bit lower in blood sugar than it's used to running on, and maybe starting to tap into this fasted keto type state potentially. And so that's the feeling that you can expect. That's normal. It is transient, and know that it will eventually, over a period of days to maybe a week, it'll go away, and you'll feel this energized sort of energy when you tap into these ketones, and your body gets more used to that. Now, the more times you click in and out of keto, so the more periods you spend in ketosis, the better your body gets at adjusting to it. And over time, your body becomes what's known as metabolically flexible. So basically, your body starts to get better at running on different fuel sources. When there's carbohydrate being put into the system, it'll just click back into using glucose as the primary fuel source. When you do go into that fasted state, it'll transition more effectively and efficiently into using ketones as the primary fuel source. So you get less and less of those side effects. And I've been cycling on and off keto for years now, doing a lot of intermittent fasting, and I don't have any of those effects of keto flu any longer. I can feel when it kicks in, but for me now, because I've done it for long periods of time and I'm metabolically flexible, my body's used to it, I become aware that I'm drifting into ketosis because I feel energized. I actually notice it as a positive. So hang in there if you're trying it for the first time. Maybe try and schedule your first go at keto at a time where you might be, on a weekend or something where you're at home. Maybe certainly don't do it around key events work-wise or social life-wise or sporting-wise. You don't want to be balancing this first crack at keto with something significant. But try and schedule it for a time where you can anticipate having some of these potential negative side effects, and you can be in a position to deal with them and not having to be at your best for that first time. Now, as with all my videos where I discuss medical content, this isn't designed to be medical advice. It's designed to inform and educate so you can make better choices yourself. But I recommend that before you kick off keto or do any form of intermittent fasting, that you get yourself checked up by your GP. And particularly if you do have underlying health conditions, and specifically things like diabetes, particularly type 1 diabetes or the insulin-dependent diabetes or any other underlying health disorder, it's best to touch base with your doc before you have a go at the keto diet. But for the average healthy person out there, the evidence suggests that this is quite a safe process and has a huge amount of the benefits that we described. So that brings us to the end of this video on keto. As I mentioned throughout the video, I've also got other videos around intermittent fasting that links into keto. Great way to either kick off keto or maintain your keto diet. So check out my video on intermittent fasting. And if you want to have a look at what specifically happens when you fast for a prolonged period and the effect that has on blood sugars in terms of how they go when you're not putting any fuel into the system at all, and even when you are continuing to train. So I've got a video that just tracks my blood sugars and my ketones and a couple of other biomarkers during a 48-hour fast. So you can check out that video as well. So thank you for joining me in this video. I would love to have you as part of my tribe. So if you find value in my videos and you're interested in these sort of topics, all things surrounding human performance, particularly related to the military veteran first responder community, then hit subscribe and follow along. If you think others in your community might enjoy this, then please do share it. Would love to hear from you in the comments, either about this video your experience with keto and intermittent fasting, or any other comments or topics that you might like me to cover on the show. Would love to hear from you in the comments. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.